The mist comes first. It moves through the trees the way breath moves through a sleeping mouth, slow, without intention, without edge. You cannot say exactly when it arrived. One moment the forest was simply dark, the way any forest is dark before dawn, and then the mist was there, curling between the trunks of trees so large that three people linking hands could not reach around them. Their bark is rough and furrowed, ancient even by the standards of a world in which everything is ancient. Ferns press against your calves. The air smells of wet earth and something green and alive that has no modern name. You are standing in the Jurassic, not the Jurassic of the cinema, not the version with electric fences and visitor centres and the hum of generators somewhere just beyond the tree line. The real Jurassic. 150 million years before anyone would think to put a fence around any of this. The world is warm here in a way that no winter will interrupt for another 100 million years. The oxygen is slightly richer than what your lungs know. Your first breath here would be the cleanest breath you have ever taken. Something moves in the canopy above you. You hear it before you see it. A displacement of air. A whisper of enormous wings folding. Then silence. Then the low, resonant exhalation of something large and utterly unafraid. You are not in danger. You are only a witness. That is enough. Let the mist settle around you. Let your shoulders drop. The story that is about to unspool across the next several hours has been waiting for 150 million years to be told, and there is no rush. The Jurassic does not hurry. It breathes in long, slow cycles, the way deep time breathes with a patience that makes centuries feel like afternoons. Close your eyes for a moment. The ferns are real beneath your fingertips. The mist is real against your skin, and somewhere, not far, the ground carries the weight of something tremendous. The story begins now. Or rather, it has always been beginning. Welcome. If you are here to fall asleep, you have found exactly the right place. Tonight we are going back, not a few years, not a few centuries, but an almost incomprehensible distance into the past, to the Jurassic Period, a stretch of Earth history so unlike our own that it might as well be another planet. And in many ways, it was. If you enjoy listening to sleepy prehistoric dinosaur stories like this, subscribe. I post stories like this weekly. The Jurassic lasted from approximately 201 million years ago to roughly 145 million years ago. That is 56 million years longer than the entire span of time since the non-avian dinosaurs disappeared. Within that vast stretch of time, life on Earth underwent transformations that still shape the world you live in. The continents were in different places. The seas were warmer and wider. The air held more moisture, and the land was green in ways that have no modern equivalent. This is not a story about danger. It is a story about wonder, about the specific, almost unbearable beauty of a world that existed for tens of millions of years and left its record in the bones of mountains and the patience of stone. We will walk through Jurassic forests so tall the canopy vanishes into haze above us. We will stand at the edge of shallow inland seas and watch creatures that science is only now beginning to understand in their full complexity. We will listen to the sounds of a world that has no human voice in it, only wind and water and life in such abundance that the silence is itself a kind of music. You are going to hear about dinosaurs tonight, but not as monsters, not as movie villains or museum specimens, as animals, as living things with physiologies and behaviours and social structures that scientists have spent decades carefully reconstructing from fragmentary evidence, from footprints pressed into ancient mud, from eggs preserved in volcanic ash, from the microscopic structure of bone that tells us how fast they grew and how warm they ran. The Jurassic dinosaurs were real in the most complete sense of that word, and tonight we are going to spend time in their company. There is no need to stay awake for any of this. Let the details wash over you the way mist washes over a forest floor. If you drift away somewhere in the middle, the story will still be here when you return. The Jurassic is patient. It has been waiting for you for 150 million years. Find a comfortable position. Let your body settle. The ferns are soft beneath your feet, and the air is warm, and something extraordinary is about to begin. To understand the Jurassic, you first have to understand what it replaced. The Triassic period ended approximately 201 million years ago in one of the 5 great mass extinction events in Earth's history. It was not as catastrophic as the Permian extinction you may have heard described elsewhere, the one that came 252 million years ago and erased nearly 90% of all species on the planet. but it was severe. Something happened at the end of the Triassic. Most scientists believe it was another massive volcanic event, this one called the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, a great outpouring of lava and greenhouse gas that warmed the planet and acidified the oceans, and when the dust settled, the world had changed in ways that would define the next 56 million years. Many of the competitors to the dinosaurs were gone. The large crurotarsal archosaurs, distant relatives of modern crocodiles that had dominated Triassic landscapes, were severely reduced or wiped out entirely. The large amphibians that had clung to their ecological niches were gone, and the early mammals, small and cautious and mostly nocturnal, were still there but as minor characters in a story they would not get to dominate for another 160 million years. Into that emptied world, the dinosaurs expanded. This is one of the most important ecological dynamics in the history of animal life on Earth. The pattern by which a mass extinction, terrible as it is for the species that vanish, creates a kind of biological vacuum that surviving lineages rush to fill. Scientists call this adaptive radiation, and what happened to the dinosaurs at the start of the Jurassic was one of the most spectacular instances of it ever recorded in the fossil record. In the early Jurassic, dinosaurs were still relatively modest in size and diversity. By the Middle Jurassic, they had begun to explore body plans and ecological roles that would have seemed impossible for any animal that came before. And by the Late Jurassic, the period we will spend most of our time in tonight, they had reached a magnitude of form and number that still staggers the imagination. What made this possible? Part of the answer is the world itself. At the beginning of the Jurassic, the supercontinent Pangaea, that single enormous landmass that had existed since the Permian, was beginning to break apart. The process was slow by any human standard, but in geological terms it was gathering momentum. Rifts were opening in the crust. Shallow seas were beginning to flood into those rifts, creating new coastlines where there had been only dry interior before. The Tethys Sea was widening to the east. What would eventually become the Atlantic Ocean was just beginning to announce itself as a narrow strip of shallow warm water between what would become North America and Europe. This matters enormously for life. When a supercontinent breaks apart, it creates new coastlines. New coastlines mean new shallow water environments, the most biologically productive environments on Earth, where sunlight can reach the seafloor, where nutrients wash in from the land, where coral-like reefs can form, and fish and invertebrates and marine reptiles can thrive in extraordinary diversity. The fragmentation of Pangaea during the Jurassic drove an explosion of marine life that parallels the explosion of terrestrial life we will be exploring tonight. Both were happening simultaneously, in different realms, for the same underlying reason. A world was becoming more varied, more geographically complex, offering more niches for life to inhabit. On land, the climate of the early Jurassic was warmer and more humid than the late Triassic had been in many regions. The great arid interior of Pangaea, that vast desert heart where the supercontinent's enormous size prevented moisture from penetrating, was beginning to break up as the rifts created new pathways for ocean influence to reach inward. Ferns and horsetails and tree ferns spread across landscapes that had previously been dry. Conifer forests, already present in the Triassic, expanded and diversified. Something that functioned like a modern rainforest, though made of entirely different plant species, began to appear in equatorial regions. This is the green world into which the Jurassic dinosaurs were born. One detail that most people do not realize about the Jurassic is that flowering plants, the angiosperms that today make up the majority of plant species on Earth, and which give us our fruits, our vegetables, our flowers, had not yet evolved. The Jurassic was a world without flowers. Its forests were made of conifers related to modern pines and araucarias, of cycads with their palm-like fronds and barrel-shaped trunks, of ginkgos with their distinctive fan-shaped leaves, of tree ferns unfurling in the filtered light beneath the canopy. It was green, deeply green, but in the way a forest looks when it has grown up without bees, without butterflies, without the evolutionary pressure of pollination by animals. The greens were darker, the textures more uniform. Wind was the great pollinator. The forest was ancient in a way that modern forests, for all their beauty, are not. As you walk through this Jurassic forest in your imagination, letting the details settle softly around you, not straining to hold them, notice how the light comes down through the canopy in long, slanted columns. The cycads cast shadows like open hands. A horsetail at the edge of a stream is taller than you are, its hollow stem ringed with tiny pointed leaves, unchanged since the Carboniferous more than 100 million years before this. The ground is soft underfoot, padded with deep layers of organic matter that have been accumulating season after season for longer than you can comfortably picture. There is a smell here. Wet soil and living green and something resinous from the conifers. A clean, ancient smell. The smell of a world that has not yet learned to be anything but exactly what it is. In the early Jurassic, the first large dinosaurs are appearing. Prosauropods, the lumbering, long-necked ancestors of the later sauropods, are browsing through these forests, their long necks allowing them to reach vegetation that no competitor can access. Small, quick theropods are hunting smaller prey in the undergrowth. The dinosaurs have the world mostly to themselves, but they are not yet the architectural marvels they will become. That comes later. That comes in the middle and late Jurassic, as conditions continue to change and life has more time to explore what is possible. But before we arrive at the giants, and we will arrive there, gently, in our own time, it is worth pausing here at the threshold of the Jurassic and simply breathing the air of a world so foreign and so beautiful that no human eye has ever truly looked upon it. We know it only through inference, through the careful reading of rocks and bones and chemical signatures. But inference, done carefully and with love for the subject, is a kind of time travel. And tonight we are travelling. The mist has not lifted. It has only changed its shape, pooling now in the low places between tree roots, rising again where a shaft of early light touches the ground. You are still standing in the forest. You have nowhere else to be. The Jurassic has all the time in the world. And somewhere, just beyond the edge of your vision, something moves through the ferns with a patience that suggests it has been here much longer than you have. It has. Let that thought settle like sediment. There is no hurry. The next chapter of this world is already beginning to unfold, one slow heartbeat at a time. There is a fact about the Jurassic world that takes a moment to fully absorb. If you had been standing on the eastern coast of what is now North America during the Middle Jurassic, you could have walked gradually, over many millions of years, to what is now Morocco. The land was that connected. The Atlantic Ocean, as a mature body of open water, did not yet exist. The breakup of Pangaea was not a single event. It was a process that unfolded over tens of millions of years, beginning roughly around the Triassic-Jurassic boundary and continuing well into the Cretaceous. During the Jurassic itself, the supercontinent was in various stages of fragmentation, with different rifts opening at different rates, creating a patchwork of separating landmasses that were still partially connected, still sharing plant and animal populations across land bridges and shallow seaways that would eventually vanish entirely. This geographic complexity, the in-between state of a world, neither fully connected nor fully fragmented, had profound consequences for the dinosaurs. One of the most revealing things about Jurassic dinosaurs is how widespread certain groups are. The sauropod dinosaurs, those magnificent long-necked giants we will meet more fully in a later chapter, show up on virtually every landmass that existed during the Jurassic, from North America to Europe, to Africa, to China, to what is now South America. This makes sense if those landmasses were still at least occasionally connected, still allowing animals to disperse across the globe before the oceans between them grew too wide to cross. Scientists can trace these distributions in the fossil record and use them to reconstruct the sequence of continental separations, which rifts opened first, which land bridges lasted longest, which populations became isolated early, and which remained in contact. It is detective work of a peculiar and beautiful kind. A fossil found in Tanzania tells you something about when Tanzania separated from North America. A shared tooth shape between a Portuguese theropod and a Moroccan one suggests a connection that closed before either population had time to diverge significantly. The bones of animals dead for 150 million years are, in a sense, maps of a world that no longer exists. Here is an unknown fact that most people never encounter. The Jurassic is one of the only periods in Earth history when both polar regions were ice-free simultaneously. The Arctic and Antarctic, in the Jurassic, were not the frozen extremes we know today. They were temperate cool, certainly, and dark for extended periods during polar winter, but not glaciated, not hostile in the way they are now. And this matters because it means dinosaurs lived at the poles. Fossilized dinosaur bones have been found in what was Jurassic Alaska and what was Jurassic Antarctica, suggesting that some species either lived year-round in these high-latitude environments or migrated through them seasonally, the way modern caribou migrate across the tundra. The pole-dwelling Jurassic dinosaurs endured months of winter darkness, which raises a fascinating question about whether some of them may have been able to regulate their body temperature far more actively than cold-blooded reptiles can. A question that leads directly into the long, still unresolved debate about dinosaur physiology, but we will get to that question in its own time. For now, let us stay with the geography, with the slow, tectonic drama of a world sorting itself into its modern configuration. The Tethys Sea, that ancient body of warm water stretching east of Pangaea, was one of the most biologically rich environments in Jurassic Earth. Its shallow margins teemed with life. Ammonites in their elegant coiled shells, belemnites like living darts in the water column, ichthyosaurs, those dolphin-shaped marine reptiles that had already been present since the Triassic, gliding effortlessly through warm water in pursuit of fish and cephalopods. Plesiosaurs were there too, their long necks sweeping through the water with a grace that belies their large bodies, their four flippers generating a kind of underwater flight. And on the seafloor, coral reefs were building themselves with patient industry, creating the three-dimensional habitats that support extraordinary diversity. Jurassic coral reefs were not identical to modern ones, different species of coral, different ecological communities, but the principle was the same. A reef builds a world for other life to inhabit. These ancient reef systems eventually became the limestone deposits we find today in places like the Jura Mountains of France and Switzerland, which gave the Jurassic its name. Think about that for a moment as your breathing slows. The mountains of France contain in compressed and lithified form the sea floor of the Jurassic. You can walk through them and find, if you look carefully, the preserved shells of ammonites and the coral structures of ancient reefs. The word Jurassic itself is a reminder that the mountains of today were often the sea bottoms of yesterday. Meanwhile, on the slowly separating landmasses, the plant life of the Jurassic was itself diversifying in response to the expanding range of climates. In equatorial regions, lush forests of tree ferns and cycads and conifers covered the landscape. In drier subtropical belts, more open woodland prevailed, with cycads and drought-tolerant conifers. And in the temperate zones, which in the Jurassic extended much closer to the poles than they do today, because of the overall warmth of the climate forests of ginkgo and Chekhovanovskaya, a now extinct group of plants with needle-like leaves formed cool, shadowy canopies over terrain that was nothing like the tundra that would eventually replace them. One of the quietly astonishing things about ginkgo biloba, the tree sold today in health food stores and planted as a street tree in cities around the world, is that it is essentially a Jurassic plant. Its closest living relatives are extinct. It was already present, already well established, already looking very much as it does today, when Brachiosaurus was browsing through the forests of what is now Tanzania. The ginkgo is not just old, it is Jurassic. Standing under a ginkgo tree today is, in a small and genuinely meaningful way, standing in the presence of something that lived through the entire story we are telling tonight, and came out the other side intact. The world is full of these quiet continuities. They're easy to miss if you are moving too fast. As Pangaea continued its slow disaggregation through the Middle Jurassic, the climate diversified. The homogeneous, greenhouse-warm world of the early Jurassic began to develop regional variations, wet and dry seasons, coastal climates influenced by newly formed seaways, interior regions that began to develop monsoon patterns as the geometry of the continents changed. Life responded to this complexity by diversifying further. More niches meant more opportunities for specialization. More specialization meant more species, more elaborate body plans, more extraordinary experiments in how to be alive. This is the world that is generating the giants. It is a world in motion, not in the frantic way of human history, not in the quick way of a season changing or a weather system passing, but in the slow, deliberate way of plates moving and seas widening and forests advancing across land that the sea has recently vacated. A motion so vast and so patient that the creatures living within it could not perceive it any more than you can perceive the Earth's rotation as you lie still. And yet the motion is real. The world is changing, and from that change, extraordinary things are about to emerge. Let your awareness drift with it. Let the slow continental movement carry your thoughts toward the quieter edges of wakefulness. The next world we enter is larger than this one, more extravagant, more astonishing. But there is no need to rush toward it. The mist is still here, the forest is still breathing, and somewhere far below, in the deep mantle of the earth, the heat that moves continents is moving them still, as patient and as certain as sleep. If you are drifting now, let yourself go. Subscribe so the next story is waiting when you return. Sleep well. Nothing in the history of land-dwelling animals prepares you for a sauropod. Not in the intellectual sense. You can know the numbers beforehand and still be entirely unprepared for the physical reality. An adult Brachiosaurus, the iconic long-necked dinosaur that has appeared in illustrations and models and films for over a century, weighed somewhere between 30 and 50 metric tons. Its neck alone was 9 meters long, longer than a school bus. When it raised that neck to full height, the top of its head was 15 meters off the ground, roughly the height of a 5-story building. And Brachiosaurus, extraordinary as it was not the largest sauropod that has ever been found. We will get to the largest ones. First, let us understand what a sauropod actually was. The sauropods were a group of dinosaurs that arose from prosauropod ancestors in the early Jurassic and went on to produce the largest land animals in Earth's history. Their defining characteristic was the combination of a long neck, a long tail, 4 pillar-like legs, and a body plan that was essentially a biological engine for processing enormous quantities of plant material. They were, in the most literal sense, living machines for converting Jurassic vegetation into animal mass, and they did it with a thoroughness and efficiency that no other group of animals has ever matched. Here is something that most people do not know about sauropod necks. Scientists have spent considerable effort trying to understand how sauropods could support those extraordinary necks, and what they found challenges some common assumptions. Sauropod neck vertebrae were, in many species, extraordinarily hollow. The bones contained large air pockets, pneumatized cavities connected to a system of air sacs that extended from the lungs, similar to the air sac system found in modern birds. In some sauropods, the vertebrae were 60 to 70% air by volume. This meant that a neck which, made of solid bone, would have been impossibly heavy, was instead surprisingly light for its size, strong in its architecture, like a bird bone or an aircraft fuselage, but not crushingly massive. This pneumatization of sauropod skeletons is one of the clearest indications that sauropods were deeply related to modern birds, part of the same evolutionary lineage that would eventually produce every feathered creature alive today. The hollow bones, the air sacs, the evidence emerging from microscopic bone structure, all of it points toward a biological kinship that the exterior of a Brachiosaurus gives no hint of. Now close your eyes, if they are not already closed, and try to build this animal in your imagination. You are standing in a late Jurassic floodplain, in what is now the western United States, a place that scientists call the Morrison Formation, a vast deposit of sedimentary rock that has yielded more Jurassic dinosaur fossils than almost any other place on Earth. The time is late afternoon, perhaps 150 million years ago. The air is warm and slightly humid, carrying the scent of the conifers that line the distant ridges and the softer smell of the fern-covered floodplain at your feet. The ground vibrates before you see the animal. It is a subtle vibration, not the cartoon earthquake of a monster movie, but something more like the feeling of standing near a very large truck on a quiet road, a low-frequency tremor that you feel in your feet before your mind has processed it as information. Then the trees at the edge of the floodplain part, slowly, as though being pushed aside by something that does not notice them. And the neck comes first. It comes out of the forest canopy, rising from the trees like a column of smoke that has decided to take on animal form. The neck is vast and thick at its base, tapering gradually toward a small, almost delicate head at its end. The head itself is surprisingly unremarkable in proportion to the rest of the animal. A long, rather horse-like face with nostrils positioned not at the tip of the snout but higher, toward the top of the skull. The eyes are on the sides of the head, as a prey animal's eyes tend to be, providing wide-angle vision but little depth perception. Then the body emerges from the trees. It is like watching a building detach itself from the ground and begin to move. The shoulders of a large Brachiosaurus were higher than its hips. It was one of the few sauropods with front legs longer than its back legs, giving it a slightly giraffe-like profile, a forward lean that helped direct that enormous neck upward toward the highest canopy rather than outward. The back is broad and flat, a landscape in itself, a surface of grey-green skin crossed by the faint ridges of the muscles beneath. The tail, as long as the neck, extends behind, a counterbalance swinging with each step in a rhythm that speaks of enormous bodies in motion. The footsteps, when they come, are not loud. This surprises people who have imagined sauropods as thundering behemoths. But 50 tons distributed across 4 pillar legs, each foot a broad oval of callous tissue, makes less noise than you would think. The ground yields slightly. The ferns at the edges of each footfall press down and then, slowly, spring back up. There is a sound like deep breathing from the animal, not laboured, just immense, the sound of lungs the size of small rooms inflating and deflating with something like calm. The Brachiosaurus does not look at you. It does not look at much that is at ground level. Its attention, to the extent you can read it in the posture of that neck and the slow tracking of those eyes, is directed upward toward the high branches of the Araucarian conifers at the forest edge, 30 or 40 feet above the ground, where the densest leaves are. It reaches. The neck extends with a hydraulic smoothness that speaks of a mechanism refined over millions of years. The small mouth opens, and it feeds. The sound of a sauropod feeding is surprisingly gentle. No tearing, no grinding sauropods had simple, peg-like teeth designed not to chew but to rake or strip leaves from branches, swallowing them whole. The actual digestion happened in the enormous fermentation chamber of the gut, where microbes broke down the cellulose in plant cell walls over a period of days. A sauropod's digestive system was, in a sense, a slow-cooking engine patient, and thorough in a way that fast metabolism never is. Here is another detail that astonishes scientists who study these animals. Based on calculations of how much food an animal of this size would need to maintain itself, adult sauropods may have eaten as much as 200 kilograms of plant material per day. Some estimates go higher. This means that a herd of sauropods, and there is good evidence that at least some species moved in herds, from trackways preserved in ancient mud that show multiple large animals moving together in the same direction, could have had a transformative effect on the landscape. They were ecosystem engineers on a scale that nothing alive today approaches, stripping trees, compacting soil, shaping the distribution of vegetation across entire regions. What lived alongside these giants? In the Morrison Formation, that treasure trove of late Jurassic life from western North America, the same layers of rock that preserve Brachiosaurus bones also preserve the remains of Apatosaurus, Diplodocus, Camarasaurus, and Barosaurus. 4 or 5 different giant sauropod species coexisting in the same environment. How did they avoid competing directly with each other for food? The answer seems to lie in their different body plans. Diplodocus, with its lower slung neck and the unique way its teeth were positioned to crop vegetation at mid-height, may have been primarily a fern feeder, sweeping the ground layer. Camarasaurus, with its more robust teeth, may have been able to eat tougher, coarser vegetation. Brachiosaurus, reaching highest of all, had the canopy largely to itself. Different species, different heights, different diets. A resource partitioning so elegant that the ecosystem could support multiple giant species at once. This is the Jurassic's answer to the question of how so much large life could coexist. Specialization, and a world productive enough to sustain the specialists. As the light on the floodplain begins to shift toward the warm gold of late afternoon, the Brachiosaurus moves on, stepping across the flat ground with a measured, unhurried purpose that makes the distance it covers seem almost accidental. The ferns where it walked are pressed into temporary fossils. Then they rise again, slowly, as though remembering themselves. The world is very quiet after the giant passes. The insects resume their patient chorus. The river continues its conversation with its own banks. And the next chapter of this story begins to assemble itself from the warm afternoon air. Every world that supports giants in such abundance must also support the things that hunt the vulnerable among them. The Jurassic was no exception. The great theropod dinosaurs, the 2-legged, mostly meat-eating lineage that would eventually give us Tyrannosaurus rex and, through a different evolutionary path, every songbird that has ever perched in a tree, were present throughout the Jurassic in a diversity that most people find surprising. When the name Jurassic predator comes to mind, many people think of Allosaurus, and they are right to think of it. But Allosaurus was not alone, and it was not the only remarkable hunter in its world. Let us begin, though, with Allosaurus. It deserves the attention. Allosaurus fragilis, the name means roughly different lizard in Greek, referring to the unusual hollow structure of its vertebrae when it was first described in the 1870s, was the apex predator of the late Jurassic Morrison Formation. An adult Allosaurus reached lengths of 8 to 12 meters and weighed somewhere between 1 and 2 metric tons, though some specimens found in Portugal suggest that some individuals of related species may have been considerably larger. It walked on its powerful hind legs, its body balanced by a long, muscular tail, its forelimbs shorter than its legs, but not the vestigial appendages they would eventually become in tyrannosaurs. Allosaurus had large, three-fingered hands tipped with curved claws that could function as grappling hooks. Its skull was remarkable. Scientists have studied it extensively, and what they have found challenges the popular image of theropod predators as simple bite-and-hold hunters. The skull of Allosaurus was large but not massively built. It had prominent ridges above the eyes that may have played a role in display or species recognition, and it was lightened by large openings that reduced its weight without sacrificing structural strength. The teeth were serrated, blade-like, and slightly curved backward, designed for cutting rather than crushing, and the jaw joint, based on detailed biomechanical analysis, suggests that Allosaurus may have used a strike technique quite different from a crocodile's death roll or a lion's throat clamp. Some researchers have proposed that Allosaurus hunted using a hatchet-like strike, opening its jaws extremely wide and driving the upper jaw down into prey with the force of its neck muscles, using the teeth as a cutting tool rather than a gripping device. This would have been effective against large, thick-skinned prey like the smaller sauropods and the armoured stegosaurus animals that a simple bite-and-hold approach might not have been able to dispatch quickly. The hatchet strike hypothesis remains debated, but it illustrates something important about how scientists think about theropod behaviour, not as simple savage attack, but as a complex set of behaviours evolved over millions of years in response to specific prey species. Here is a detail that is largely unknown outside specialist circles. Allosaurus was extraordinarily abundant. At some fossil sites in the Morrison Formation, most notably the Cleveland Lloyd Dinosaur Quarry in Utah, the bones of dozens of individual allosaurs have been found together in concentrations that have puzzled scientists for decades. One interpretation is that these sites represent death traps, muddy pools or tar-like deposits that trapped prey animals, which in turn attracted predators, which in turn became trapped themselves. The ratio of predator to prey bones at Cleveland Lloyd is the inverse of what you would expect from a normal ecosystem. Far more allosaurs relative to their prey species than a functioning food web could support. This suggests that something unusual was happening, that this was a site where animals died in unusual numbers rather than a sample of the living population. But Allosaurus was not hunting alone in this world. Alongside it lived Ceratosaurus, a slightly smaller but in some ways more striking theropod distinguished by the horn on its nose, a small laterally compressed horn made of bone above the nasal region, whose purpose is still debated. Display? Species recognition? Combat between individuals? We do not know, but it suggests a creature more complex in its social signaling than a simple killing machine. Torvosaurus, known from both North America and Portugal, was potentially larger than Allosaurus in some estimates, a massive top-end predator that may have competed with Allosaurus for the largest prey items. The existence of multiple apex or near-apex predators in the same environment is something that modern ecosystems rarely support. Lions and hyenas occupy similar niches in Africa but remain in tension, while the African wild dog fills a different ecological role. The coexistence of Allosaurus, Ceratosaurus, and Torvosaurus in the Morrison suggests either that they were partitioning prey in some way we have not fully understood, or that the Morrison ecosystem was so productive that it could support multiple large predator species simultaneously. Further afield, in the late Jurassic of East Africa, in the famous Tendaguru formation of what is now Tanzania, a different set of large theropods was operating. Veteropristisaurus and other Tanzanian predators lived alongside some of the same or closely related sauropod species as those in North America, which is itself telling evidence of how recently those landmasses had been connected. The predators, like the prey, had spread across the still fragmented supercontinent during the windows when land connections allowed it. Smaller theropods filled the world between the giants. Ornitholestes, a small, swift, lightly built theropod from the Morrison Formation, has been depicted for over a century hunting lizards and early mammals in the undergrowth, and its relatively delicate build and grasping hands do suggest a predator that operated at a very different scale than Allosaurus. Whether it also caught small pterosaurs or juvenile dinosaurs is a matter of some debate, but the ecological niche it represents, the agile small prey specialist, is one that every complex ecosystem needs. And then there are the coelurosaurs, the broader group that includes not just small theropods, but the evolutionary lineage that leads directly to birds. By the late Jurassic, coelurosaurs were already beginning to diversify in ways that hint at the extraordinary explosion of bird diversity that would follow. Some of them were showing evidence of feathers. Some may have been capable of at least limited powered flight, or something like it. The line between non-avian dinosaur and true bird, in the late Jurassic, was far less clear than our categories suggest. Archaeopteryx lithographica, found in the famous Solnhofen limestone deposits of Bavaria, Germany, which preserve the finest-grained and most detailed fossils of the Jurassic world, sits at or very near that boundary. It had wings, it had feathers, it had a wishbone, but it also had teeth, clawed fingers on its wings, and a long bony tail, features that no modern bird possesses. It was discovered in 1861, just 2 years after Darwin published On the Origin of Species, and it arrived at a moment when the scientific world was freshly attuned to the possibility of transitional forms. It has been called the world's most important fossil, and that claim is not extravagant. What Archaeopteryx tells us, and what subsequent discoveries of feathered dinosaurs in Jurassic and Cretaceous deposits in China have confirmed and elaborated, is that the origin of birds was not a sudden invention, gradual elaboration of features that were already present in the theropod. Dinosaurs. Feathers, it turns out, were not invented for flight. They were present in non-flying theropods, possibly for insulation, possibly for display, possibly both, long before any dinosaur took to the air. Flight was, in this reading, an afterthought, a repurposing of structures that evolution had already produced for other reasons. Every bird you have ever seen, every sparrow on a fence post, every hawk riding a thermal, every penguin waddling toward the sea, is a living Jurassic dinosaur, carrying in its hollow bones and its air sacs and its feathers the deep evolutionary memory of a world that existed 150 million years ago. That thought is worth sitting with for a moment, in the quiet way that the Jurassic itself invites contemplation. The hunters of the long grass are settling now. The afternoon is cooling. Somewhere in the shadows at the edge of the forest, something large and patient is resting, its eyes half closed, its breathing deep and slow. The hunt is over for this part of the day. The Morrison Formation floodplain is quiet under a dimming sky. Rest with it. The next chapter begins in the water. While the great dinosaurs moved across the land, the seas of the Jurassic were their own world, and in some ways, an even stranger one. The western interior seaway of North America had not yet formed during the Jurassic. That great north-south ocean channel through the middle of the continent came later, in the Cretaceous. But in the Jurassic, the shallow epicontinental seas of Europe, the great archipelago of islands and warm, shallow water bodies that covered much of what is now Western Europe, were among the most biologically rich environments on the planet. And the Tethys Sea, stretching from what is now the Mediterranean region all the way east toward what is now Southeast Asia, was a warm, productive ocean basin that supported a diversity of marine life that rivals anything alive in the modern oceans. Imagine floating on the surface of the Jurassic Tethys on a still afternoon. The water is warm, warmer than most modern tropical seas, because the overall global temperature is higher, and there are no polar ice caps to create the cold, deep currents that chill even equatorial oceans from below. The colour of the water is a deep, saturated blue-green, because the chemistry of the Jurassic Ocean was slightly different from our own, more alkaline, with a different balance of dissolved minerals. At the surface, the light sparkles and fractures into moving patterns on the sandy bottom below. The bottom, where you can see it, is covered in a pale limestone that has been building up from the accumulated shells of countless organisms for millions of years. Just below the surface, the water is alive. Ammonites drift through the water column in their elegant coiled shells, propelling themselves slowly with jets of water expelled from their mantles, just as a modern nautilus moves. The ammonite shell is one of the most beautiful structures in the natural world, a spiral of chambers, each one larger than the last, the whole forming a mathematical curve called the logarithmic spiral that appears again and again in nature, from the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower to the arm of a galaxy. The living animal occupied only the outermost, largest chamber of its shell. The inner chambers were gas-filled and sealed, providing buoyancy, a sophisticated hydrostatic system that let the ammonite control its depth in the water column with considerable precision. Ammonites were extraordinarily diverse in the Jurassic. Some were the size of a coin, some were the size of a wagon wheel, some had smooth, streamlined shells, others had elaborate ornamentation, ribs and knobs and keels that vary so much between species that scientists use ammonite shell shape as one of their primary tools for dating Jurassic rock layers. Because ammonite species evolved relatively rapidly and were distributed globally, a particular ammonite species found in one rock layer can be used to correlate that layer with matching layers on the other side of the world. The ammonites are, in this sense, the clocks of the Jurassic precise, globally distributed, extraordinarily well preserved. Here is a fact that very few people know. Ammonites apparently grew throughout their lives without stopping, and the growth rings in their shells record seasonal variations in the water chemistry, much the way tree rings record wet and dry years. Scientists studying these growth lines have been able to reconstruct seasonal temperature variations in Jurassic oceans with surprising precision, finding evidence, for instance, that the Tethys Sea experienced summer temperatures that were genuinely warm, even by tropical modern standards, and winter temperatures that were mild rather than cold. The ammonites lived through a world of long, warm, gentle seasons. Below the ammonites, the middle water column was the domain of belemnites, relatives of the ammonites and the modern squid and octopus, with a different body plan. Instead of an external coiled shell, belemnites had an internal bullet-shaped structure called a guard, a solid, calcified rod that provided support for the animal's body. Belemnite guards are extraordinarily common as Jurassic fossils. Their solidity means they preserve well when the soft body of the animal has long since decayed. In some rock layers, you can find belemnite guards lying in dense concentrations, the fossil record of a population explosion, or a mass death, or simply the gradual accumulation of shells from many generations of a very abundant animal. The belemnites were actively swimming hunters. Their body plan was similar in many ways to a modern squid: a streamlined body, a ring of tentacles around the mouth, a jet propulsion system for rapid movement. They came in many sizes, from small forms no larger than a finger to impressive animals a meter or more in length. They formed an important link in the Jurassic marine food web, eating small fish and other invertebrates, and in turn being eaten by larger predators. And the large predators of the Jurassic seas were formidable. The ichthyosaurs, those remarkable convergent cousins of modern dolphins, evolved from terrestrial ancestors that had returned to the sea during the Triassic, were by the Jurassic extremely well adapted to open ocean life. Their bodies were streamlined to the point where the resemblance to a dolphin or a tuna is almost uncanny, right down to the dorsal fin and the forked tail fluke. This is convergent evolution at its most striking. An animal that shared no recent common ancestor with either fish or dolphins, but had arrived at a similar body plan because the ocean shapes its inhabitants according to the same hydrodynamic rules regardless of their origin. Stenopterygius, a Jurassic ichthyosaur known from exceptionally preserved specimens in the Posidonia Shale of Germany, has been found with the outlines of its soft body preserved in carbon films, a rare and extraordinary preservation that reveals the dorsal fin and tail fluke that would normally leave no fossil trace. Some Stenopterygius specimens have been found containing the bones of fetuses within the body cavity, confirming what scientists had long suspected from the body plan. Ichthyosaurs gave birth to live young at sea, as modern whales do. They were committed to the ocean in a way that made the option of coming ashore, as sea turtles do, biologically impossible. One specimen of Stenopterygius found in Germany contains the remains of its last meal in the stomach region belemnite hooks, tiny structures made of organic material that survived digestion, revealing that this particular ichthyosaur had been eating belemnites in the hours before it died, a last meal preserved for 180 million years. The plesiosaurs occupied a different ecological niche in the Jurassic seas. They were generally larger than most ichthyosaurs, and they divided into two major groups with contrasting body plans: the long-necked plesiosaurs proper, with small heads and long flexible necks for picking individual prey items from schools of fish or from the seafloor, and the pliosaurs, with massive heads and short necks, built for pursuing large prey at speed. The Jurassic pliosaurs included some of the largest marine predators that have ever lived. Leopleurodon, known from European Jurassic deposits, has been the subject of considerable size. Inflation in popular culture, television documentaries in the 1990s gave it a body length of 25 meters, which most scientists consider a significant overestimate. More careful analysis of the available specimens suggests a more realistic maximum of around 7 to 10 meters, which is still a formidable animal. What is not in dispute is that the pliosaurs had among the most powerful bite forces of any animal ever discovered. Their skulls were massive, and their jaws were lined with long, conical teeth designed to pierce and grip rather than cut. They were ambush predators or active pursuers. The fossil record is not detailed enough to be certain, but whatever their hunting style, they were near the top of the Jurassic marine food chain. Beneath the active hunters, the seafloor was its own world. Crinoids, those ethereal animals that look like underwater flowers but are actually relatives of starfish, covered vast areas of the Jurassic seafloor in dense communities, their feathery arms filtering particles of food from the water currents. Sea urchins grazed on algae, bivalves filtered water, coral reefs built their slow limestone architecture over centuries and millennia. Sponges of many kinds filled in between the corals, filtering bacteria and dissolved organic matter from the water. And on the open sandy bottom between the reef patches, marine crocodilians patrolled. Yes, crocodilians. The Jurassic seas contained crocodile relatives that had adapted to marine life, their bodies streamlined, their limbs modified into paddles, their tails developing vertical fins for propulsion. Metriorhynchus and related genera were genuine marine animals, as fully committed to the sea as the ichthyosaurs. They are among the most unusual members of an already unusual group, and they remind us that in the Jurassic, the boundaries between terrestrial and marine life were porous, crossed again and again by different lineages, each time producing a new kind of creature from the raw material of an old one. The Jurassic Sea is darkening now. The plankton that gives the water its colour is dimming with the light. An ichthyosaur, resting near the surface as it must to breathe, releases a slow breath and sinks back toward the middle depths, where the water is cooler and prey more concentrated. A school of small fish turns in unison, catching the last light on their scales in a brief silver flash. The ocean breathes. Everything else breathes with it. Let the rhythm of the sea carry your breath for a moment in with the slow rise of a swell, out with its long recession. The Jurassic is very patient with its visitors. There is nothing you need to do or remember. The water will hold you gently until morning. Before the birds truly took over the sky, before the feathered descendants of the theropod dinosaurs diversified into the 10,000 species that fill the air today, the Jurassic sky belonged to another group entirely, the pterosaurs. Pterosaurs were not dinosaurs. This is a distinction that matters, because the word dinosaur has become so capacious in popular imagination that it tends to absorb everything large and prehistoric. Pterosaurs were the sister group of the dinosaurs closely related, sharing a common ancestor in the Archosaur family tree, but following their own evolutionary path from at least the Triassic onward. They were the first vertebrates to achieve powered flight, beating the birds by tens of millions of years and doing it in a completely different way. A bird's wing is a modified forelimb with feathers attached to the bones of the hand. A pterosaur's wing was a membrane of skin and muscle stretched from an enormously elongated fourth finger of the hand to the body and, in many species, to the hind leg. The fourth finger, the equivalent of your ring finger, was the main structural element of the wing, in some large pterosaurs reaching lengths of several meters by itself. The other three fingers were free at the leading edge of the wing, small and clawed, and may have been used for climbing or for maneuvering on the ground. Pterosaurs had hollow bones, as birds do, another instance of the air sac system that characterizes the Archosaur lineage. Many pterosaurs had elaborate head crests, made of bone or of soft tissue or some combination of the two, whose functions are debated but probably included display, species recognition, and possibly even a role in thermoregulation. They were not, as old illustrations suggested, leathery, scale-covered, bat-like creatures. Many pterosaurs were covered in a hair-like fibrous material called pycnofibers, not true hair, not true feathers, but an analogue that suggests these animals were at least partly endothermic, capable of generating their own body heat. In the Jurassic, pterosaur diversity was already impressive. Rhamphorhynchus, known from exquisite specimens in the Solnhofen limestone, was a small to medium-sized pterosaur with a long tail tipped by a diamond-shaped vein, probably for stability and steering in flight. Its teeth were long and pointed, interlocking when the jaws closed, ideally suited for catching fish. Some Solnhofen specimens of Rhamphorhynchus have been found with fish preserved in their throat region, direct evidence of their diet. One extraordinary specimen preserves both a rhamphorhynchus and a fish in its stomach, and also bears the tooth marks of a larger predator, a snapshot of a predation event captured in the limestone. 3 animals in 3 moments of their relationship with each other. Anurognathids were the tiny insect hunters of the Jurassic sky. Small, stubby-tailed pterosaurs with large eyes and short, wide jaws tipped with small, pointed teeth. They were probably agile flyers, capable of the rapid direction changes needed to catch flying insects, and may have been at least partly nocturnal, based on the proportionally large size of their eyes relative to their skulls. An anurognathed resting on the bark of a conifer at night, its eyes open, waiting for a moth, something like a moth, in a world where moths as we know them would not exist for another 100 million years, is a creature of such complete strangeness and such small beauty that it is difficult to hold in the mind without it slipping away into the dark. Here is something about pterosaur flight that is not widely known. The wing membrane of pterosaurs was not simple skin. Studies of exceptionally preserved specimens have revealed that the wing membrane had an internal structure of fibers called actinofibrils, running from the leading edge toward the trailing edge at various angles, creating a stiffened surface that could be controlled and shaped by the muscles attached to it. The wing was not a passive surface like a kite. It was an active, dynamic structure capable of complex shape changes that would have allowed pterosaurs to maneuver with great precision. In this respect, their wings may have functioned more like the wings of modern bats, which also use dynamic membrane deformation for flight control, than like the rigid wings of birds. The largest Jurassic pterosaurs were approaching a wingspan of 2 to 3 meters, impressive animals, though they would be dwarfed by the Cretaceous pterosaurs that eventually reached wingspans of 10 or 11 meters, larger than a small aeroplane. In the Jurassic, the sky was filled with forms of modest to medium size, diversified into many ecological roles, but not yet exploring the extremes of body size that the Cretaceous would eventually produce. Taking to the sky in your imagination now, let yourself rise above the Morrison floodplain on the warm updraft of a Jurassic afternoon. Below you, the floodplain spreads out in its full summer abundance, the silver threads of braided rivers, the dark patches of conifer forest at the high ground, the pale, sandy stretches where the rivers have recently moved and left their gravel bars behind. Sauropods move through the distance with the slow, deliberate pace of things that have no reason to hurry. A small cluster of allosaurs rests in the shade of a grove of araucarian pines, barely visible at this height. Around you, pterosaurs. A rhamphorhynchus passes close enough that you can see the individual fibers of its wing membrane, can see the small clawed fingers folded at the leading edge. You can see the eye tracking the water below for any glint that might be a fish near the surface. It does not acknowledge you. You are not part of its world in any meaningful way. You are simply a witness, floating on borrowed air. The climate patterns of the Jurassic world created consistent thermal currents, rising columns of warm air above sun-heated rocks, and sand that pterosaurs almost certainly exploited for soaring. The same physics that allows a modern condor to remain aloft for hours with almost no wing beats would have been available to Jurassic pterosaurs, allowing them to cover large distances with relatively little energy expenditure. A pterosaur hunting fish along a Jurassic coastline could have ranged over enormous areas in a single day, riding the thermals from one fishing ground to the next. One detail that specialists find fascinating, but that rarely makes it into popular accounts. Some pterosaur trackways have been found preserved in ancient mud, and they reveal something unexpected about how pterosaurs moved on the ground. They walked on all fours, with the wing finger folded back and the other 3 fingers of the hand touching the ground alongside the hind feet. The tracks look nothing like you would expect from a flying animal. They are almost mammal-like, with 4 distinct impressions from each step. In some trackways, the stride length suggests a competent, even agile mover on land, not the clumsy, awkward creature that early reconstructions depicted. Pterosaurs did not merely endure their time on the ground between flights. They moved through their terrestrial moments with something like grace. As the afternoon cools on the Morrison floodplain, the pterosaurs begin to seek their roosts. Some settle in the high branches of the tallest conifers, the wing membrane folding neatly, the animal hanging like a strange fruit, its eyes closing against the dimming light. Others find cliff faces or the rougher bark of fallen logs. The small anurognathids, if they were indeed nocturnal, are just beginning to stir, their large eyes reflecting the first faint stars. The sky empties slowly, one creature at a time, until only the stars remain more numerous and more brilliant than any modern night sky, because the air is cleaner and the atmosphere slightly different, and there are no cities anywhere on Earth to create the dim orange glow that modern humans have learned to accept as normal. You are floating in this darkness light as a thought. The stars of the Jurassic are real and ancient. Some of them are exactly where they are in your own night sky. Others have moved, over the vast span of time, to different positions, the slow drift of the stars themselves, orbiting the center of the galaxy on timescales that make even geological time feel brief. Rest here for a moment. Under the Jurassic stars, the pterosaurs are roosting. The great dinosaurs are breathing slowly in the dark. The sea, somewhere to the east, is carrying its own quiet commerce of things that live and hunt and rest in the warm water. Everything is in its place. Everything is breathing. There is an animal in the Morrison Formation that is immediately recognizable to any child who has ever owned a toy dinosaur, and yet remains, after a century and a half of study, deeply mysterious in its most distinctive feature, Stegosaurus stenops. Its name means roofed lizard, a reference to the early theory that its plates lay flat against the back like roof tiles, a theory that was quickly overturned, but the name persisted. The plates themselves, those large diamond-shaped or triangular bone structures that alternate along the spine in two rows, are the source of the mystery. We know what they were made of. We know approximately where they sat on the animal's back. What we do not know, what remains genuinely uncertain after more than 150 years of investigation, is what they were for. The theories are varied and interesting. The oldest and most intuitive is that the plates were defensive, that they made the back of a Stegosaurus harder to attack from above. But analysis of the plate material reveals that it was not particularly dense or well suited to deflecting a bite. The plates were relatively thin, and the bone was penetrated by a rich network of blood vessels, suggesting that whatever the plates did, structural defense was not their primary purpose. A second theory is that the plates were thermoregulatory, that by orienting itself broadside to the sun, a Stegosaurus could use those vascularized plates as solar panels, absorbing heat into the blood that flowed through them, and by orienting into the wind, could shed excess heat by convection. This is an attractive idea, but experiments with models of Stegosaurus plates in wind tunnels have produced ambiguous results, and the evidence from living animals for similar structures functioning this way is limited. The current consensus, insofar as there is one, leans toward display. The plates were probably primarily visual signals, advertising something to members of the same species: fitness, sexual maturity, individual identity, or some combination of all three. Stegosaurus plates may have been brightly colored, covered in skin that was pigmented in ways that the fossilized bone cannot reveal. Some researchers have noted that the plates are positioned along the animal's most visible profile, its silhouette against the sky when viewed from the side, exactly where you would want a display structure to be. Another piece of evidence. In a sample of Stegosaurus specimens, the plates show significant variation in shape and size between individuals, consistent with a display structure under sexual selection, rather than a functional structure whose effectiveness depends on precise form. Here is a fact that almost no one outside the research community knows. Stegosaurus also had a secondary set of defensive weapons that are far less famous than its plates. Along its flanks, below the plates, were small bony ossicles, tiny lumps of bone embedded in the skin that would have provided a kind of chainmail-like protection against attacks from the side. These small dermal bones are rarely preserved because they are small and easily overlooked, but when they are found in association with Stegosaurus skeletons, they tell us that the animal's defensive armor was more extensive than the dramatic dorsal plates suggest, and at the end of the tail were the thagomizer. This is a word that does not have an ancient Latin or Greek etymology. It was coined as a joke by the cartoonist Gary Larson in a 1982 Far Side comic strip in which a group of cavemen anachronistically sharing the world with dinosaurs, as cartoon characters often do, named the Stegosaurus tail spikes after a fictional caveman called Thag Simmons. The scientific community found this charming enough that the informal term entered actual usage, and paleontologists do refer to Stegosaurus tail spikes as thagomizers in technical publications. It is one of the very rare cases in which a piece of scientific nomenclature originates in a newspaper comic strip. The thagomizer, the cluster of 4 long spikes at the tail tip, was certainly a weapon. Biomechanical analysis suggests that the tail of Stegosaurus was muscular enough to deliver powerful lateral swings, and the spikes, which could reach nearly a meter in length, were well positioned to strike a theropod attacking from behind or from the side. Several Allosaurus specimens from the Morrison Formation show healed puncture wounds in their bones that match the size and shape of Stegosaurus tail spikes, direct evidence, written in fossil bone, of Stegosaurus fighting back against predation. One famous specimen, known informally as Big Al, an Allosaurus found in Wyoming in 1991, had multiple pathological bones suggesting encounters with prey that fought back, including potential bite wounds and a badly healed foot injury. Whether Big Al died from these accumulated injuries is not certain, but the skeleton of this particular Allosaurus reads like a record of a hard life of a predator that encountered resistance repeatedly and paid for it. Stegosaurus was not alone in the armored dinosaur lineage. Even in the Jurassic, Kentrosaurus, from the Tendaguru Formation of Tanzania, was a smaller and in some ways more heavily armed relative with additional spikes on its shoulders and along its flanks, giving it an almost hedgehog-like appearance when viewed from above. Chungkingosaurus and Tuojangosaurus from the Jurassic of China fill out the picture of a globally distributed group of dinosaurs that occupied the large herbivore niche alongside the sauropods, processing the lower vegetation layers while the long-necked giants attended to the canopy above. But how did Stegosaurus actually eat? This is another area of active and interesting research. The teeth of Stegosaurus were small, leaf-shaped, and located only at the front of the jaws. They were not well suited for heavy chewing of fibrous material the way a horse's teeth are. Studies of jaw mechanics suggest that Stegosaurus fed primarily on soft vegetation ferns, horsetails, the softer parts of cycad fronds, and may have been unable to process the tougher woody material that some sauropods apparently consumed. This dietary specialization would have reduced direct competition with the giant long-necked dinosaurs that shared its environment. The daily life of a Stegosaurus, insofar as we can reconstruct it, would have been a study in patient herbivory. Moving slowly through the fern meadows and horsetail thickets of the Morrison floodplain, cropping vegetation at ground level or low browsing height, keeping the thagomizer raised and ready when the shadow of something large fell across the plain from the direction of the forest, resting in the shade of the larger trees during the midday heat, moving to water in the early morning and evening. Picture one now, standing still in the dappled light at the edge of a conifer grove. The plates catch the filtered afternoon sun and cast a pattern of shadows on the ground that shifts slightly as a breeze moves through the trees. The animal is enormous up close, longer than a city bus, though much of that length is neck and tail, and yet it has a quality of stillness, of deep unhurried patience, that makes it seem somehow smaller than its measurements would suggest. It is not alert in the way a prey animal in immediate danger is alert. It is simply present, the way a rock in a river is present, or the way a very old tree is present with a solidity that suggests it has been here for a long time and intends to remain. The plates move slightly not because the animal is moving its body, but because the plates are attached to the skin rather than to the skeleton, and as the skin moves with the animal's breathing, the plates shift with microscopic subtlety, catching the light differently from one breath to the next. The Stegosaurus lowers its head. It feeds. The afternoon stretches around it like a long, warm thought. There is no particular urgency anywhere in this scene. The ferns grow back as quickly as they are eaten. The light shifts with the imperceptible rotation of the planet, and the animal with the mysterious plate stands in its own time, neither hurrying toward the future nor looking back at the past. This is the Jurassic at rest. Let it rest with you. If you are still with us, drifting gently through this ancient world, that is wonderful. If you are drifting towards sleep, that is even better. Subscribe so the next story is waiting when you return. Sleep well. The Morrison Formation of Western North America and the Tendaguru Formation of Tanzania have dominated Western paleontology's understanding of the Jurassic for over a century, partly because they were discovered early, partly because they are extraordinarily rich, and partly because the scientific institutions that explored them had the resources to do so. But there is another Jurassic world that has been revealing itself to science with increasing astonishment over the past several decades. The Jurassic of China. China contains some of the most spectacularly preserved Jurassic deposits in the world. The Zhejiang region of Sichuan province has yielded such extraordinary concentrations of dinosaur bones that the local government built one of the world's great dinosaur museums directly over one of the most productive quarries, allowing visitors to look down at ongoing excavations while the bones of dinosaurs are still being exposed from the rock. The Yixian Formation of Liaoning Province, while primarily early Cretaceous in age, contains preserved soft tissues including feathers of such extraordinary quality that it has transformed our understanding of dinosaur biology. And the Jurassic formations of Xinjiang, Yunnan, and other provinces have produced a cast of dinosaur characters that are largely unfamiliar to Western audiences but no less spectacular for that. The Chinese Jurassic was not simply an eastern mirror of the Morrison. The fauna was different partly because China had its own evolutionary history, and partly because the degree of continental connection between Eastern Asia and North America fluctuated during the Jurassic, allowing some groups to disperse between the regions while others remained separated. Some Chinese Jurassic dinosaurs are closely related to North American forms, suggesting windows of connection. Others are distinctly different, endemic to Asia in ways that suggest those windows were closed for long enough to allow divergence. Mamenchisaurus is the emblematic Chinese Jurassic sauropod, and its neck is the first thing anyone mentions about it. Among the longest-necked animals that ever lived, Mamenchisaurus had a neck that in some species comprised more than half the animal's total body length in the species. Mamenchisaurus sinocanidorum, known from a single specimen from Xinjiang, the neck alone may have reached 15 meters. This is extraordinary even by sauropod standards. The vertebrae of this neck were supported by a system of ossified tendons that stiffened the structure against gravity, while still allowing some degree of flexibility. How Mamenchisaurus used this neck, whether it could raise it vertically to feed in the high canopy, or whether it was held more horizontally, sweeping through vegetation at medium height, is a question that biomechanical modeling has addressed with interesting but not fully conclusive results. Yangchuanosaurus was the apex predator of the Chinese Jurassic, a large allosauroid theropod, comparable in size and general body plan to North American Allosaurus, but distinct enough to represent a different evolutionary lineage. Its skull, known from good specimens, was robust and ornamented with small ridges and bosses that suggest display played a role in its social life. It hunted the Mamenchisaurus and the other large herbivores of the Chinese Jurassic, and its relationship with those prey animals was probably as complex, involving assessment, pursuit, ambush, and the careful avoidance of defensive counterattack as any predator-prey relationship in the modern world. Here is an unknown fact that most people never encounter. The Jurassic of China has yielded evidence of parental behavior in dinosaurs that predates similar evidence from later periods. In the Zhejiang fauna, the bones of juvenile sauropods have been found in association with adult skeletons in patterns that some researchers interpret as evidence of adult animals remaining with their young, not in the simple sense of nest guarding, but in a more sustained association that might represent a form of herd structure in which adults provided some protection for juveniles. This evidence is not conclusive, and the interpretation is debated, but it raises fascinating possibilities about the social lives of these animals. The Jurassic of China also preserves evidence of small dinosaurs that challenge simplistic narratives about the direction of evolutionary innovation. Xiaotingia, Anchiornis, and several other small-feathered dinosaurs from Chinese deposits have been at the center of intense scientific debate about the origin of birds and the relationships between different theropod groups. Some analyses place these animals in positions that suggest bird-like features evolved and were lost multiple times in different lineages, a more complex and messier evolutionary picture than the simple linear progression from dinosaur to bird that old textbook diagrams implied. Anchiornis huxleyi, named partly in honor of Thomas Henry Huxley, the 19th century biologist who first proposed a close evolutionary relationship between birds and theropod dinosaurs, is small enough to hold in two hands and was found in deposits that span the Jurassic-Cretaceous boundary. Microscopic analysis of the fossilized feathers of Anchiornis specimens has revealed something remarkable. The melanosome structures within individual feathers, the tiny organelles that produce color in modern bird feathers, are preserved in such detail that scientists have been able to reconstruct the color pattern of Anchiornis with considerable confidence. It was mostly black and white, with a reddish-orange crest and reddish speckling on the face and wing feathers. We know what color it was. A dinosaur that lived more than 150 million years ago, and we know what color it was. This is the kind of detail that makes Jurassic paleontology feel less like archaeology and more like time travel. The colors of Anchiornis are locked into its fossilized feathers, the way memories are locked into photographs not immediately apparent, requiring a certain kind of attention to reveal, but genuinely there. Other aspects of the Chinese Jurassic world deserve mention. The pterosaurs of Jurassic China include some forms with unusual head crests and body proportions that differ from their European contemporaries in interesting ways. Ctenochasma, from Jurassic Chinese and European deposits, had a remarkable skull modification. Its teeth were reduced to extremely fine, dense, comb-like structures, possibly used for filter feeding, straining small food items from shallow water in a manner convergent with modern flamingos. A pterosaur behaving like a flamingo is exactly the kind of biological surprise that the Jurassic specializes in producing. The plant life of Jurassic China was also distinctive. Ginkgo trees were particularly diverse in Asia during the Jurassic, more diverse than in any other region or time period, suggesting that Eastern Asia may have been something like the evolutionary center of the ginkgo lineage. Fossil ginkgo leaves from Jurassic Chinese deposits include forms with deeply divided fan-shaped leaves, narrow strap-like leaves, and all variations between, occupying a range of ecological niches in the conifer cycad ginkgo forests that covered the landscape. In the deep green of a Chinese Jurassic forest, imagining yourself there now, the air humid with the breath of a monsoon season, the sound of a river somewhere nearby. The diversity is a kind of richness that does not announce itself. You have to stand still and let your eyes adjust. Then you begin to see. The small feathered dinosaur on the branch 3 meters above you, shifting its weight from foot to foot. Its reddish crest bright against the grey morning sky. The mammal in the leaf litter below, small as a mouse, nose working the air for information you cannot read. The pterosaur spiral diving over the river, hunting in the early light. This is not a simplified world. It is not a primitive world. It is a world of extraordinary complexity, refined by hundreds of millions of years of evolution, operating in a state of ecological equilibrium, so sophisticated that it will support itself with only gradual changes for another 50 million years. It is a world that works, and in its working, it is at rest. As you are at rest now, or nearly so, the details of this ancient landscape settling around you like the quiet of a very old forest, which does not need to speak to make itself known. Let us slow down now, and spend a complete day in the Morrison Formation, not cataloguing its inhabitants, not analysing its geology, but simply being present within it from one sunrise to the next. This is a different kind of knowing, the knowledge that comes from patience rather than investigation, from attention rather than analysis. The Morrison Formation during the late Jurassic was not the arid upland that the American West conjures in many imaginations. The region during this period was a broad alluvial plain, crossed by rivers that flowed generally westward from a young mountain range, the ancestral Rockies, not the modern Rockies, which had not yet formed toward the shallow sea that covered what is now Nevada and Utah. The plain was broad and flat in most areas, with the rivers braiding and wandering across it, changing their courses over decades and centuries, and leaving behind their deposits of sand and silt and gravel that would eventually lithify into the very rock we now excavate for dinosaur bones. The climate was seasonal, though not in the way a modern temperate climate is seasonal. There was a wet season and a dry season, driven by the monsoon patterns that the geometry of the continents and the warmth of the global climate generated. During the wet season, the rivers ran full and sometimes flooded, spreading across the floodplain in shallow, warm sheets of water that advanced slowly across the fern meadows. During the dry season, the rivers retreated to their channels and some smaller watercourses dried up entirely, leaving pools that gradually concentrated, grew warm, and in some cases became oxygen-poor, as evaporation and organic decay consumed the dissolved oxygen. Dawn comes slowly in the Morrison. The first light finds the floodplain as a flat, slightly misty landscape, the distant ridgelines of the uplands barely visible against a sky that is turning from grey to pale gold. The air has cooled during the night, not uncomfortably, but enough that the smaller dinosaurs and early mammals may have been less active in the small hours, retreating to burrows or dense vegetation for warmth. But as the light strengthens, movement begins. The first animals moving in the early light are often the smallest. The mammal-like creatures of the Morrison, none of them larger than a small cat, most of them mouse to rat-sized, emerge from their burrows, and the deep leaf litter with the particular alertness of animals that are always at risk from something larger. They are foragers, insects, seeds, small invertebrates, anything that provides nutrition. Their world is measured in centimeters and meters, not in the kilometers that the large dinosaurs traverse. They move quickly, always returning to cover, always checking the air for scent information. Their lives are high intensity and probably short. Most will not survive their first year. Early Jurassic mammals, actually they were mammalia forms at this point, more precisely defined, were more diverse than their rarity in the fossil record suggests. Fossil teeth, which are small and hard and preserve far better than other bones, reveal a remarkable variety of dietary specializations even in these early small mammals. Some had teeth suggesting insectivory, others had teeth more suited for hard food items like seeds or snail shells. Others show patterns consistent with an omnivorous diet. They were filling ecological niches that would eventually belong to their far future descendants, but in the Jurassic, they were doing it in the presence of the most spectacular large animal fauna that land has ever supported. As the morning warms, the large dinosaurs begin to move. Sauropods that have been resting through the night, lying down, perhaps, in the way elephants lie down to sleep. Though this is a matter of some scientific debate, rise with the slow effort of creatures whose mass imposes costs on every movement. There may have been a sound to a large sauropod rising from rest, the deep creak of joint and tendon, the soft impact of a foot the size of a bathtub meeting the ground, the low exhalation of breath compressed by the effort. A small herd of Diplodocus, perhaps 5 or 6 adults, with a few juveniles moving close to the center of the group, begins to move across the floodplain toward a stand of conifers on slightly higher ground. Diplodocus is in some ways the most elegant of the Morrison sauropods, extremely long and slender relative to its enormous size, with a neck that is not quite as long as Brachiosaurus, but held at a lower angle, and a tail that extends to extraordinary length behind the body. The tail tip of Diplodocus was, based on skeletal analysis, whip-like tapering to a thin terminal section that could, if cracked like a bullwhip, have produced a loud sonic crack. Whether this was actually used as a weapon or as a display behavior, or both, is a question that brings out genuine enthusiasm in vertebrate paleontologists. Here is something fascinating. The structure of Diplodocus's teeth, simple, pencil-like pegs arranged at the very front of the mouth, was almost certainly used for feeding by raking leaves from branches rather than biting them off. The teeth show heavy wear at their tips consistent with this kind of use. Computer models of the skull and jaw mechanics suggest that Diplodocus may have been able to strip an entire branch of its leaves in a single sweep, eating enormous quantities of food very quickly. Given that an adult Diplodocus may have needed 100 to 200 kilograms of food per day, this efficiency would have been essential. By mid-morning, the floodplain is busy with its own quiet industry. Herbivores feed, predators rest or conduct the unhurried reconnaissance that precedes a hunt. A group of small ornithopods, 2-legged plant eaters of various sizes, the middle layer of the Morrison herbivore community, between the giant sauropods and the tiny mammals, moves through a fern meadow near the river, their beaked mouths cropping vegetation close to the ground. Camptosaurus and Othnilosaurus were among the Morrison's ornithopods, bipedal animals with the useful ability to move on all 4 legs when feeding at low levels, switching to 2-legged locomotion for speed when needed. The river, by mid-morning, is a social space. Many animals come to drink at roughly predictable times, and the water's edge is a place where different species must negotiate their presence near each other with the same kind of instinctive risk assessment that governs a modern African waterhole. The sauropods, by virtue of their size, have priority in any encounter, but even they approach the water with a certain awareness, positioning themselves where they can see in multiple directions, drinking quickly, retreating. A lone Allosaurus has been resting in a stand of cycads since before dawn. It has been watching the waterhole with the specific, patient attention that is the predator's primary tool. It is not hungry in the way a human gets hungry with urgency and discomfort. It operates on a longer cycle, needing to eat perhaps every few days rather than every few hours, and it can wait with a thoroughness that would be difficult for most warm-blooded animals to maintain. Its eyes, positioned slightly more toward the front of the skull than a strict lateral placement, give it some degree of binocular vision, some capacity for depth perception, for judging distance that serves a predator well. Here is a fact about Allosaurus that puts it in startling company. Analysis of inner ear canal morphology. The shape of the semicircular canals that control balance and spatial awareness suggests that Allosaurus had a relatively rapid head movement capability, similar to modern birds of prey. It could track moving targets with its eyes and head more quickly than its size might suggest. This makes sense for a predator that needed to follow rapid movements of its prey, and it adds to the picture of an Allosaurus that was not simply a large, slow-reacting beast but a sensitive and capable hunter. Afternoon arrives without drama. The shadow of a large cloud passes over the floodplain, briefly cooling the air, and the quality of the light changes for a few minutes from bright gold to something softer. The insects that have been hovering near the river, large dragonfly-like forms, though not identical to modern dragonflies, briefly shift their behavior, moving lower or becoming more still. Then the cloud passes, and the light returns. The day's last drama belongs to the small. A juvenile sauropod, separated briefly from its group, is assessed by the watching Allosaurus with a long, still gaze, and then the Allosaurus looks away. The calculation, whatever its form in a brain organized so differently from our own, has been made. The risk of engaging a juvenile whose adults are nearby versus the energy cost of pursuing something more isolated has been weighed. The Allosaurus settles lower into its resting posture. The sun moves toward the western horizon. The shadows of the conifers lengthen across the floodplain. A warm exhalation of heated air rises from the rock outcrops at the edge of the floodplain and carries with it the resinous smell of the cycads and the rich, wet smell of the river. The Morrison Formation is preparing for night, and as it does, there is something in the quality of the light, in the way the shadows lengthen and the air cools and the sounds of the day's activity diminish to a quieter register, that is not entirely different from the feeling of the time just before sleep that long. Slow exhalation at the end of a day, that settling of the world into its own rest. Let the Morrison's evening come in around you. You are not required to remain awake for it. The dinosaurs will be here in the morning. The world will be here in the morning. Everything you might want to see or know is patient and waiting, preserved in rock and time, available to you whenever you choose to return. For now, the shadows lengthen. The light goes gold and then amber, and then red at the horizon's edge, and the Jurassic turns slowly toward its night. There is a question about the Jurassic that almost never gets asked, because it seems unanswerable. What did it sound like? Sound does not fossilize. We can find the bones of a creature's inner ear and make inferences about the range of frequencies it could hear. We can find the structures related to sound production in certain animals and guess at what they might have generated. We can look at the insects of the period and, from their wing structures and body morphology, speculate about the sounds they produced. But the actual soundscape of the Jurassic, the specific combination of calls and songs and wing beats and wind and water that constituted the auditory environment of this world, is something we can only reconstruct from inference, from analogy, and from imagination. And yet, it is worth trying. The most important thing to understand about the Jurassic soundscape is what it did not contain. No bird song. Not in the elaborate, melodic sense that we mean when we use that phrase. Birds in the late Jurassic were just beginning to exist. Archaeopteryx itself was almost certainly not a singer in any meaningful sense, and the diversification of vocal bird species would not begin in earnest until the Cretaceous, and would not reach its modern complexity until long after the non-avian dinosaurs were gone. The dominant acoustic producers of the Jurassic would have been insects, wind, water, and the animals themselves. The insects of the Jurassic were already producing sound. Crickets and katydid-like insects, orthopterans, had been stridulating, rubbing body parts together to produce their characteristic songs, since the Permian. The Jurassic orthopterans were not identical to their modern descendants, but they occupied the same ecological and acoustic niche. The hum, chirp, and rasp of insect song would have been the ambient soundtrack of a Jurassic evening, rising with the cooling air as the larger animals settled to rest. There is something deeply familiar about this. The insect chorus is one of the most ancient sounds available to a human ear, essentially unchanged in character over hundreds of millions of years. Here is something fascinating that most people do not know. A team of researchers studying the wing venation and body structure of a Jurassic cricket fossil from China, Archaebolus musicus, found in the Yixian Formation, was able to reconstruct the sound that cricket produced using the same physics that governs modern cricket song. They built a three-dimensional model of the wing and simulated its vibration, and they produced an actual recording of what this cricket sounded like 150 million years ago. The sound is recognizably cricket-like, a pure, sustained tone rather than the more complex trills of most modern crickets, clean and high and somehow entirely itself. You can find this recording if you search for it. It is among the more remarkable things a human being can listen to in the modern world. Frogs were also present in the Jurassic, and many frogs are vocal. The earliest frogs evolved in the Triassic, and by the Jurassic they had diversified into forms occupying the margins of rivers and wetlands, probably producing calls not entirely unlike those of their modern descendants. A frog call at a Jurassic river's edge, combined with the insect chorus and the sound of moving water, would have created a soundscape that a modern human transported back in time would find not entirely alien. The wind through the Jurassic forests would have had its own character moving through conifer needles, and the broad flat ginkgo leaves, and the feathery fronds of tree ferns in ways that produce specific acoustic signatures. A stand of Araucaria conifers in a Jurassic wind probably made a sound not unlike the sound of modern pine trees in wind, a low, complex hush that changes with the speed and direction of the air. This is a sound that has been continuous on Earth for hundreds of millions of years, as long as there have been trees to breathe it. And the dinosaurs themselves? This is where inference becomes most speculative and also most interesting. The vocal anatomy of non-avian dinosaurs is, with rare exceptions, not preserved in the fossil record. The soft tissue structures of the larynx and any associated resonating chambers are gone, but we can make inferences from related living animals. Crocodilians, the closest living relatives of the non-avian dinosaurs among current animals, sharing with them the archosaur ancestry, communicate vocally in various ways. Young crocodilians produce high-pitched calls that trigger parental responses. Adults produce low-frequency vocalizations, bellows, hisses, and infrasound vibrations that function in territorial and courtship contexts. Birds, the other living archosaur group, produce the most varied and complex vocalizations of any animal group. It is reasonable to suppose that at least some non-avian dinosaurs communicated vocally. The question is how. Recent research has proposed an intriguing answer, or at least a partial one. Modern crocodilians can produce sound through a mechanism called closed-mouth vocalization, in which the vocal folds produce sound that resonates through the body tissues without the mouth opening. Some birds do this too. Doves, for instance, produce their characteristic coos this way, and a study of the skull morphology of certain dinosaurs, particularly the crested hadrosaurs of the Cretaceous, has suggested that the elaborate cranial crests of these animals may have functioned as resonating chambers for closed-mouth vocalizations, producing low-frequency calls that could carry over long distances. By extension, some researchers have proposed that at least some Jurassic dinosaurs may have produced closed-mouth sounds. Low hums or rumbles generated in the body and transmitted through tissues, similar to the infrasound communication used by modern elephants, which can carry for kilometers through the ground and air. These sounds would have been felt as much as heard by nearby animals and by any human observer unlucky or lucky enough to be present. The thought of standing on a Jurassic floodplain and feeling, through the soles of your feet, the low-frequency communication of a sauropod herd a kilometer away, is one that rewards careful consideration. It is not the roar of a monster. It is something more like the voice of the landscape itself, a sound so low and pervasive that you might confuse it for weather, or for the vibration of the world going about its business. The Morrison at night was not silent. Insects sang. Something in the river called. The wind moved through the conifers, and somewhere in the darkness, the breathing of enormous animals, the rise and fall of vast rib cages, the exhale of lungs that could hold hundreds of litres of air, produced a rhythm that the night absorbed without comment. There is a particular quality of sound in very wild places at night that is not silence, but a deep layered fullness of natural sound, so constant and so varied that the human mind, searching for pattern, eventually relaxes its search and simply receives it. This was probably the character of a Jurassic night, full, not empty, alive with sound, not quiet, but a fullness that did not demand attention or produce anxiety, a background of the world's own voice that the animals sleeping within it had been born into and would carry with them until they died. Let that sound settle around you now, the insect chorus, the river, the wind, the deep, barely perceptible vibration of the world alive in the dark. You do not need to identify it or understand it. You only need to let it be there, as it has always been there, as it was there 150 million years before your name existed or your breath moved through the air. The Jurassic sounds like this, like rest, like the patient hum of a world that knows how to take care of itself. Let your body know that too. There is a particular pleasure in discovering that the world you thought you understood has been holding things back from you, not from malice, but simply because some details require a certain quality of attention to reveal themselves. The Jurassic has many such details. Most of them never appear in children's books or popular documentaries. They live in the specialist literature, in the careful measurements of paleontologists and geochemists, waiting for someone to find them and carry them out into the wider world. Tonight, this chapter is that carrying out. Consider the inner life of Jurassic bone. When paleontologists cut thin sections from dinosaur bones and examine them under a microscope, they find structures called lines of arrested growth, the bone's equivalent of tree rings, laid down each year when the animal's growth rate slowed, possibly during seasonal periods of cold or food scarcity. These lines allow scientists to determine with surprising precision how old an individual dinosaur was when it died. What they have found in multiple Jurassic species challenges one of the oldest assumptions about dinosaurs. They did not grow slowly over the course of a century, the way old reconstructions sometimes implied. They grew fast. A Diplodocus may have reached nearly full adult size in 10 to 15 years. An Allosaurus may have been sexually mature by 6 or 7 years of age. The Jurassic giants were, in biological terms, young animals living in old bodies achieving their extraordinary sizes through rapid growth rather than through extended time. This rapid growth has implications. It means that these animals had metabolisms capable of sustaining significant energy expenditure for years at a time. Not the slow, cold metabolism of a crocodile, but something more dynamic, more expensive, more like what we associate with warm-blooded animals. The debate about dinosaur thermoregulation, whether they were ectothermic, endothermic, or something in between, is one of the great ongoing conversations of paleontology, and the bone histology evidence leans strongly toward the conclusion that at least the larger dinosaurs maintained elevated, stable body temperatures through some combination of metabolic heat generation and the thermal inertia of very large bodies. Here is something that most people find genuinely astonishing. There is evidence that some sauropod dinosaurs may have been capable of making sounds by clapping their lips or resonating air through their nasal passages in ways that their enormous nasal cavities disproportionately large in many species would have amplified. The nasal passages of Diplodocus and related sauropods are not positioned where you might expect them. The nostril openings in the skull of Diplodocus are on top of the skull, between and behind the eyes, not at the tip of the snout as in most animals. This unusual positioning led to decades of speculation that sauropods had trunk-like structures or could submerge their bodies with their nostrils above water like a snorkel. Neither of these ideas has held up to scrutiny, but the enlarged nasal cavity has attracted a different kind of attention. The possibility that it functioned as a resonating chamber, giving the animal the ability to produce sounds with unusual acoustic properties. Or consider the feet of sauropods. At several sites in the Morrison Formation and elsewhere, fossilized sauropod trackways show only the front feet, with no impressions from the hind feet visible. For years, this was puzzling. Then a biomechanical analysis proposed an elegant explanation. The sauropods may have been walking through shallow water, and as they moved forward, the hind feet, following the same path as the front feet, were stepping into water that had already been disturbed and muddied by the front feet's passage, leaving no clear impressions. The trackways are records of animals wading large sauropods, using watercourses in their everyday movement across the floodplain, perhaps cooling themselves, perhaps accessing aquatic vegetation, perhaps simply taking the easiest route across terrain that was periodically flooded. The question that fascinates researchers about Jurassic sauropods is simply this: how did such an enormous amount of animal get made so quickly, generation after generation? Sauropod eggs were not large. The largest known sauropod eggs are roughly the size of a melon, which, relative to the adult animal that laid them, is extraordinarily small. A 50-ton Brachiosaurus hatched from an egg that weighed perhaps a kilogram. The hatchling was, relative to its eventual adult size, essentially a mouse-sized creature. It had to grow by a factor of 50,000 or more to reach adult size, and it had to do so in what was, geologically speaking, a blink. Recent work on sauropod nesting has revealed that at least some species nested colonially, with many individuals laying eggs in the same area, season after season. A nesting site in Patagonia, from the Cretaceous but relevant to sauropod biology generally, shows thousands of eggs concentrated in a relatively small area, with evidence of repeated use over many breeding seasons. The adults apparently return to the same nesting grounds year after year, a kind of sight fidelity that implies a capacity for spatial memory and geographic navigation that we rarely attribute to animals we tend to think of as simple. Here is something about Jurassic theropods that is rarely discussed here. Evidence from some specimens suggests that certain theropods engaged in physical combat with members of their own species, leaving marks on each other's bones that were subsequently healed. Healed bite marks on the skulls of theropods positioned in ways inconsistent with predation, but consistent with face biting, during intraspecific contests have been documented in multiple species. This suggests that some theropods had social lives complex enough to involve territorial disputes or competition for mates, and that those disputes were sometimes resolved through physical contact. The elaborately ornamented skulls of many theropods, the crests, ridges, and horns that appear in so many species start to look less puzzling in this context. They are the skull of an animal with a social life, advertising its status or its health to others of its kind. The Jurassic was also a period of significant evolutionary experimentation in the crocodilian lineage, the archosaurs that did not become dinosaurs. Terrestrial crocodilians, cursorial forms with upright limbs capable of sustained running, were present in the early Jurassic and in some regions persisted into the later Jurassic. Gracilisuchus and its relatives were small, agile archosaurs that would be almost unrecognizable as crocodile relatives to a modern eye. They moved quickly on long legs, their bodies slender and their heads small. The familiar low-slung, armoured crocodile body plan was not the only crocodilian option in the Jurassic. It was simply the one that survived. The deep oceans of the Jurassic held creatures that science is still working to understand. The giant Jurassic pliosaur Pliosaurus carpenteri, known from specimens from both England and Russia, had a skull over 2 meters long, and skull-to-body ratios in pliosaurs suggest a total body length that made this one of the largest marine predators in Earth's history. A bite force calculation based on the jaw musculature visible in skull specimens suggests that large pliosaurs could exert bite forces comparable to or exceeding those of modern saltwater crocodiles, which are already among the most powerful biters in the modern world. The Jurassic Ocean had things in it that would have been dangerous to any living animal, including any animal alive today. But here is what that danger actually looked like in practice. According to the fossil evidence, pliosaur prey included ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and large fish. There is evidence of pliosaur bite marks on plesiosaur bones, suggesting predation at the top of the marine food chain. The Jurassic Ocean was a fully functioning predator-prey system, with multiple trophic levels, from the microscopic plankton at the base to the giant pliosaurs at the apex. A web of ecological relationships as complex and as interconnected as any modern ocean ecosystem. Here is one more detail before this chapter rests. The Jurassic world contained ticks. Ticks as we know them, feeding on blood, exist in the fossil record from the Cretaceous onward, but arachnid relatives that may have had similar habits are known from earlier periods. And there is at least indirect evidence the shape of certain Jurassic arachnid fossils, the presence of suitable vertebrate hosts that some form of blood-feeding ectoparasitism was already operating in the Jurassic. The dinosaurs, those magnificent giants, may have had parasites. They may have scratched, the way birds scratch, the way large mammals scratch, at itching patches of skin. They may have shaken their heads at flies. They were real animals living in a real biological world, subject to the same indignities and inconveniences that all real biological worlds involve. This too is part of what makes them extraordinary. Not the magnificent exception to the rules of life, but the full, complicated, itchy, breathing, parasitized, magnificent participants in it. Let these details settle into sleep with you. Each one is a window in a very old wall, and through the window, if you look without hurrying, you can see the actual Jurassic, not the simplified version, but the real one, in all its layered, specific, astonishing reality. Rest now. The next chapter waits in the amber light of another Jurassic afternoon, patient as stone. There is a place in Bavaria, in southern Germany, where the Jurassic is preserved with such extraordinary fidelity that it feels, looking at the fossils that come from it, not like looking at rock, but like looking through glass at a world that has been paused rather than ended. The Solnhofen limestone. The limestone of the Solnhofen region was deposited in a very specific environment during the late Jurassic, approximately 150 million years ago. The region at that time was an archipelago of small islands surrounded by a semi-enclosed lagoonal system, a body of shallow, warm, highly saline water separated from the open Tethys Sea by a series of barrier reefs. The lagoon itself was periodically stratified. Warm, oxygenated water at the surface, and below that a dense, oxygen-poor layer of saltier water that settled to the bottom because of its greater density. This lower layer, being essentially stagnant and anoxic, could not support the bacterial decomposers that normally consume dead organic matter. An animal that fell into the Solnhofen lagoon or was washed in from the surrounding islands by a storm, or flew over the water and died, and sank through the upper layer and settled onto a seafloor where nothing could eat it. The fine-grained calcium carbonate mud that accumulated slowly on that bottom covered it with exquisite gentleness, embedding it in material so fine-grained that even the impression of feathers, the outline of wing membranes, the pattern of scales, could be preserved. The result is a window. Solnhofen has given us Archaeopteryx, 11 specimens of the transitional bird dinosaur, preserved in varying states of completeness, but in the best examples showing the feather impressions that make this animal one of the most important fossils ever found. It has given us Compsognathus, a small theropod the size of a domestic chicken, known from specimens so complete that scientists were able to determine what its last meal was, a small lizard, preserved in the stomach region. It has given us exquisite pterosaurs, Rhamphorhynchus with its soft tissue wing membrane visible, Pterodactylus in multiple ontogenetic stages, from juvenile to adult. It has given us marine crocodilians, sea turtles, fish in extraordinary variety, and invertebrates from ammonites to horseshoe crabs, animals whose shell is virtually identical to that of their modern descendants, suggesting that the horseshoe crab body plan has been so successful that evolution has seen no reason to substantially modify it in 300 million years. Solnhofen limestone is still quarried today for its exceptional properties as a building and flooring material. It is fine-grained, flat, and beautiful, and working quarrymen have been finding fossils in it for centuries. The first Archaeopteryx fossil was found in 1861 and sold to the British Natural History Museum, where it still resides. Subsequent specimens have been found at irregular intervals since then, each one adding details to our understanding of this transitional creature. The most recent well-preserved specimens have allowed analysis of feather coloration using the Melanson technique, revealing that Archaeopteryx had some dark feathers, possibly iridescent, possibly countershaded for camouflage, adding another dimension to our understanding of an animal we thought we knew well. Here is something about Solnhofen that is rarely discussed in popular accounts. The preservation of soft tissues in the Solnhofen limestone is not uniform. Some specimens are extraordinary, others, from the same beds, show only bones. The difference seems to depend on the precise circumstances of burial, how quickly the sediment covered the carcass, how undisturbed the burial was, whether any scavengers had access before the covering sediment protected the remains. This means that each spectacular Solnhofen fossil represents not just the animal itself, but a specific chain of events following its death, a particular combination of timing, location, and circumstance that made it different from the many individuals of the same species whose remains decay completely and leave no record at all. We are reading, in Solnhofen, a record of the extraordinarily rare. The life around the Solnhofen lagoon was different from the Morrison floodplain in character, if not entirely in its cast of characters. The islands were small and probably vegetated with sparse conifer scrub and cycads, not the vast forests of the continental interior, but a saltier, windier, more marine-influenced environment. The pterosaurs that roosted and hunted here were coastal specialists, adapted to the particular challenges and opportunities of island life. The small theropods that occasionally appear in the record were probably island-dwelling, their populations separated from the continental mainland, and potentially already beginning the size reduction that island isolation tends to produce. Island dwarfism, the phenomenon by which large animals evolving in island isolation tend to become smaller over time, because island environments support less total biomass and favour individuals with lower resource requirements, is well documented in the Pleistocene and Holocene, but has also been identified in older fossil records. Whether any of the Solnhofen animals were already showing this trend is a matter for specialist analysis, but the principle suggests that the fauna of the Solnhofen Islands may have been distinct from their mainland relatives in ways that the fossil record has not yet fully captured. The Solnhofen world operated on a different scale from the Morrison. Where the Morrison was vast, hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of floodplain and upland and river system. The Solnhofen environment was intimate. A walk from one shore to another on some of the islands might have taken less than an hour. The fauna was correspondingly smaller scaled, with nothing approaching Morrison's sauropod abundance or diversity. But what it lacked in size it made up in detail, and the detail that the Solnhofen limestone has preserved for us is among the most extraordinary gifts that the geological record has ever offered to human curiosity. Standing at the edge of the Solnhofen lagoon in the late Jurassic, the water before you, extraordinarily clear and still, its surface reflecting the cloud formations above with mirror precision, the smell of salt and something mineral, the distant sound of pterosaurs calling from their roosts on the rocky outcrops, you would not know you were standing on one of the most important archives in the history of life on Earth. It would look like a beautiful, quiet coastal lagoon, warm and peaceful in the afternoon light. And it was exactly that. The archiving was simply a byproduct of its being what it was, a place where things could settle undisturbed into perfect rest. The lagoon receives another small body, a Rhamphorhynchus, that has misjudged its dive and struck the water too hard, stunning itself, lying still for a moment on the surface before slowly sinking. The warm, saltier water closes over it without drama. The surface re-smooths, the reflection of the clouds returns. Nothing marks the spot, but the limestone will mark it, in its patient way, for 150 million years. Rest now is an act of the same patience. What is laid down gently, in stillness, is preserved. Let your thoughts settle like fine carbonate sediment into the warmth of a quiet lagoon. The world is archiving itself without your attention. You do not need to watch. The Jurassic did not end dramatically. This is one of the things that makes it different from the Cretaceous, which concluded with a genuine catastrophe, a large asteroid impact that triggered global environmental changes and ended the reign of the non-avian dinosaurs in a geological eye blink. The Jurassic ended instead with a gradual transition, a slow changing of conditions over millions of years that reshaped ecosystems without destroying them outright. The Jurassic-Cretaceous boundary, approximately 145 million years ago, is defined in the rock record not by a mass extinction, but by changes in microfossil assemblages, the tiny calcareous shells of marine plankton that are among the most sensitive recorders of ocean chemistry and temperature. Something changed in those conditions around this time, enough to cause significant shifts in which species were present and in what proportions. But the dinosaurs continued, the pterosaurs continued, the marine reptiles continued, the mammals continued still small, still mostly nocturnal, still waiting for their eventual moment. The late Jurassic itself, in the millions of years before its nominal boundary, was a time of change. The Morrison Formation ecosystem that we have been exploring throughout this journey did not persist unchanged through the entirety of the Jurassic. The climate of the late Jurassic seems to have been drying in parts of North America, with the wet seasons becoming shorter or less reliable in some periods. This would have stressed the plant communities that the giant sauropods depended on, potentially causing population fluctuations and range shifts. Toward the end of the Jurassic, some of the familiar Morrison genera disappear from the fossil record in North America while new forms appear. The turnover is not complete. It is not like a extinction event with a clear before and after. But there is a sense, reading the fossil record of the late Jurassic carefully, of a world in slow flux, of one ecological configuration gradually giving way to another. Here is something that paleontologists find genuinely puzzling about the Jurassic-Cretaceous boundary. The fossil record across it is poor in many regions. The depositional environments that were so productive of fossils during the late Jurassic, the river systems of the Morrison Formation, the lagoons of Solnhofen, the shallow seas of Europe changed in character around this time, and in some cases the rock record simply has a gap, a missing time interval represented by an unconformity, a physical break in the succession of sedimentary layers where erosion removed rock that had been deposited, or where no rock was deposited at all. These gaps are like missing chapters in a book. They represent times and places we cannot read. Scientists have spent considerable effort trying to understand what happened to the large sauropods at the Jurassic-Cretaceous boundary in North America. The iconic Morrison sauropods Diplodocus, Brachiosaurus, Apatosaurus do not have direct descendants that can be tracked continuously into the Cretaceous of North America. There appears to be a faunal turnover, with different sauropod groups becoming dominant in the Cretaceous. Some researchers have proposed that this represents a genuine extinction event at the regional level, with the Morrison sauropods dying out and later replaced by immigrants from other landmasses. Others interpret it as an artifact of the poor fossil record, with the Morrison sauropods potentially persisting longer than the fossils currently indicate. The answer, whatever it is, lies in rock that has yet to be found or has not survived to be found. This uncertainty is worth sitting with for a moment. We have spent this entire journey building a rich, detailed picture of the Jurassic world, and we have been able to do so because of the extraordinary productivity of certain fossil sites that happen to preserve, in remarkable detail, the life of their specific time and place. But those windows of preservation are scattered and incomplete. Between them are long stretches of time that are essentially invisible to us, epochs and eons that produced life in abundance but left us no readable record. The Jurassic is both very well known and profoundly mysterious. For every question that the fossil record has answered, it has generated 3 more. For every species that has been named and described, there are dozens that lived and died and left no discoverable trace. The living world of 150 million years ago was as vast and as complex as the living world of today, and we have found evidence of only a tiny fraction of it. This is not a counsel of despair. It is an invitation to humility and wonder and, in a certain light, to comfort. The fact that the Jurassic is so incompletely known means that discoveries are still being made. Each year, paleontologists working in Morocco and Tanzania and China and Patagonia and the American West bring new animals to light, new behaviors to inference, new details to the picture. The Jurassic is not a closed book. It is an ongoing reading, in which every new expedition has the potential to reveal something that changes how we understand what came before. The Jurassic-Cretaceous transition also marked the beginning of a significant change in plant life that would eventually transform the entire character of Earth's ecosystems. During the early Cretaceous, in the million years just after the Jurassic ended, flowering plants, the angiosperms, begin to appear in the fossil record in primitive forms. They start small, occupying weedy niches in disturbed habitats. Over tens of millions of years they diversify and expand, eventually overtaking the gymnosperms, the conifers, cycads, and ginkgos in terms of species number and ecological dominance. The rise of the angiosperms had cascading effects on every group of animals. The coevolution of flowers and insects produced the extraordinary diversity of modern pollinating insects, bees, butterflies, flies, beetles, and through them, the extraordinary diversity of flowering plants. The fruits and seeds of angiosperms became critical food resources for birds and mammals. The canopy structure of angiosperm forests created new ecological opportunities. Everything changed, slowly, as the flowers spread. But in the Jurassic, the flowers had not yet come. The world was still the world of conifers and cycads and ginkgos, the world that the sauropods had been born into and that had sustained them for 50 million years. It was a world that worked without flowers, that was beautiful without them, that was complete without them, though it would not remain so. There is something almost elegiac about the late Jurassic, seen from this distance. Not because it was ending, it would continue for millions more years, in various forms, before the Cretaceous began in earnest, but because it had achieved a particular kind of equilibrium, a particular expression of what land ecosystems could be, that would never quite be replicated after the mass extinction at the end of the Cretaceous erased the non-avian dinosaurs. The Jurassic represents a way of being a world that is gone. The giants are gone. The specific combination of species and ecologies and behaviors and sounds and smells and textures is gone. What remains is the rock, and the bones within it, and the inferences we draw from both, and the dreams. The late afternoon light of the Morrison Formation is stretching into evening now. The sauropods have moved toward the river. The theropods are in their preferred resting places. The pterosaurs are circling down toward their roosts, their wing beats slow and deliberate in the cooling air. The insects are beginning their evening chorus. It is the last day of the Jurassic, in a sense the last day before the gradual transition that would eventually produce a different world. But the animals living through it do not know this. They know only the warmth of the evening, the scent of the cooling earth, the slow diminishment of light. They know the comfortable weight of a body at rest. They know what you know now in this quiet place, that the world is large and old and mostly patient, and that rest is not an interruption of life but its foundation. The mist is returning. It comes in from the river, low and slow, filling the spaces between the fern fronds and the cycad trunks and the deep roots of the conifers. It is the same mist that was here at the beginning of our journey. It has been here all along, waiting for us to return to it. The Jurassic breathes in and breathes out. The Jurassic did not simply end. It continued, in transformed and fragmentary ways, into the world you live in. This is not metaphor. It is biology. Every bird that exists today, every species of the approximately 10,000 currently living, is a direct descendant of Jurassic theropod dinosaurs. The evolutionary lineage that led to birds was present in the late Jurassic, represented by Archaeopteryx and by the various small feathered dinosaurs whose remains have been found in China and elsewhere. From those beginnings, the birds diversified through the Cretaceous, survived the mass extinction at the end of that period that killed their non-avian relatives, and then exploded in diversity during the Paleogene and Neogene into the extraordinary variety of forms alive today. When you watch a crow solve a problem, you are watching a Jurassic lineage at work. When you hear a bird call in the morning, any bird call, you are receiving a sound produced by an animal whose deep evolutionary history stretches back 150 million years to a world of sauropods and pterosaurs and warm inland seas. The birds did not merely survive the Jurassic, they carry it with them. In their hollow bones, in their air sac systems, in their feathers, in the way their hip joints are constructed, and the way their feet grasp a branch, the Jurassic is present, translated through 150 million years of evolution, but recognizable to anyone who knows what they are looking at. The crocodilians are another Jurassic legacy, or rather, a Triassic-Jurassic one. Crocodilians have not remained unchanged since the Jurassic. They have evolved and diversified, and gone through their own extinctions and radiations. But the basic archosaur body plan that makes a crocodile was already present in the Jurassic, and in the fundamental architecture of a crocodile, the semi-upright posture, the armoured back, the powerful jaws, the behaviour of laying eggs in nests, we can see the ghost of the Jurassic archosaur lineage that the crocodilians represent. The ginkgo tree is a Jurassic legacy in plant form, as we discussed earlier. The Araucarian conifers, the monkey puzzle trees of South America, the Norfolk Island pines sold in garden centres are direct descendants of trees that were common in the Jurassic. When you encounter a monkey puzzle tree with its strange, geometric, prehistoric-looking branch structure, you are looking at an Araucarian that is genuinely prehistoric, descended from trees that shaded Brachiosaurus, whose pollen drifted through Jurassic air, whose seeds were eaten by animals that no longer exist. The horseshoe crab, those strange armour-plated animals that come ashore on Atlantic and Pacific beaches every spring to breed, is essentially a Jurassic animal in a modern ocean. Its body plan has been so successful, so thoroughly adapted to its ecological role, that evolution has seen no compelling reason to substantially modify it in the 300 million years since its basic form was established. A horseshoe crab is a living window into the Paleozoic and Mesozoic, an animal that shares the world with you in essentially the same form that it shared with Allosaurus. The limestone of the Jura Mountains, the mountains that gave the Jurassic its name, is made, in large part, of the accumulated shells and skeletons of Jurassic marine organisms. When you walk on Jurassic limestone in France or Switzerland or southern Germany, you are walking on the compressed and lithified bodies of ammonites and belemnites and corals and sponges and fish, all the richly varied life of the Tethys Sea, flattened and hardened by time and pressure into the stone beneath your feet. The oil and gas deposits that underlie much of the world's sedimentary basins contain, among their complex mixture of hydrocarbons, organic material that was once living tissue from Jurassic seas, and swamps the compressed and chemically altered remains of plankton and vegetation from 150 million years ago, transformed by heat and pressure into the fuel that lit the Industrial Revolution and powers the world you live in. The Jurassic, in this very literal sense, is still energizing things. The chalk cliffs of Dover, while primarily Cretaceous in origin, contain within them the long geological context of the Jurassic that came before the same accumulation of calcareous ooze from microscopic marine organisms building up over millions of years into the thick white deposits that now form coastal headlands. The process of carbonate accumulation that built the Jurassic limestone also built the later Cretaceous chalk, in an unbroken sequence of ocean chemistry that links the Jurassic world to the cliffs you can walk along today. Here is a legacy of the Jurassic that is almost never mentioned. The Morrison Formation and its equivalent deposits in other parts of the world, laid down the specific sedimentary architecture that made later oil and gas accumulation in the western United States possible. The sandstones deposited by Jurassic rivers, the same rivers that occasionally buried dinosaur bones and preserved them for us to find, also created the porous rock layers that trap hydrocarbons, and the overlying shales created the impermeable cap rocks that hold those hydrocarbons in place. The western United States has oil because the Jurassic had rivers. The two facts are connected through 150 million years of geological process. But the deepest and most important legacy of the Jurassic is not geological or material, it is conceptual. The Jurassic taught us through the careful and patient work of the paleontologists who have spent their careers reading its rocks that life is more various, more resilient, and more inventive than any prior assumption would have suggested. That animal body plans can reach sizes and adopt strategies that no reasonable extrapolation from the present would have predicted. That evolution, given enough time and the right conditions, can explore possibilities that seem, from the limited vantage point of the present, almost impossible. A sauropod is impossible, and yet it happened. 150 million years ago, it was walking across a floodplain and breathing Jurassic air and eating Jurassic conifers with a body that weighed 50 tons and a neck that reached 15 meters into the sky. The fact that it seems impossible from our perspective says something about the limitations of our perspective, not about the limitations of what evolution can achieve. The Jurassic invites us to expand our sense of what is possible, not in a vague, motivational poster sense, but in the specific, grounded, evidence-based sense of, here is what life actually did, once, on this planet, and it was more extraordinary than we would have imagined on our own. That is a gift. That is the Jurassic's gift to anyone who takes the time to pay attention to it. The Morrison floodplain is dark now. The stars of the Jurassic are bright above the silhouetted conifers. Somewhere nearby, a diplodocus exhalation, vast and slow, marks the rhythm of a living thing at rest. The mist has settled into the low places between the ferns. The river is quiet at this hour, a dark silver in the starlight. You have been here for a long time now. You have walked through forests of tree ferns and stood at the edge of warm Jurassic seas and watched the sky fill with pterosaurs in the late afternoon light. You have stood close enough to a sauropod to feel the ground tremble with its passing. You have heard, or imagined hearing, the low-frequency rumble of its communication, more felt than heard, moving through your feet and into your bones. These are not things you will carry home as memories in the usual sense. They are things that will settle into your sleep like sediment settles into water invisibly, without fuss, taking their place in the accumulated layers of things you have absorbed and that have become, quietly, part of how you understand the world. The Jurassic is very old. It is also very here. It is in the birds at your window and the limestone at the base of the wall, and the oxygen in the air that the ancient forests helped produce. It is in the evolutionary history of your own body, which shares a common ancestor with every creature we have encountered tonight, however many hundreds of millions of years back that sharing reaches. You are made of the same materials as the Jurassic. You breathe the same chemistry. You carry, in the deep structure of your cells, the same evolutionary innovations, the cellular respiration, the DNA, the ribosomes that the Jurassic animals carried. The Jurassic is not past. It is present in everything that came after it, including you. Rest well in this old, continuous, extraordinary world. The mist is here. The stars are here. The enormous breathing of the animals you have spent this night with is here, just at the edge of hearing, just below the threshold of sleep. Let it carry you. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel, as it really helps us continue making more content. Anyways, see you in the next one. The mist. It is still here. It was always here, even before you arrived, even before the story began. It is the mist of deep time, the atmospheric condensation of 150 million years compressed into a feeling, a coolness, a smell of earth, and green, and something ancient that has no modern name. The forest is quiet around you. The ferns are real beneath your fingers if you reach down to touch them. The bark of the Araucarian conifer beside you is rough and furrowed and warm, from a day of Jurassic sun that has now set, leaving only starlight and the soft blue-black of a sky so clear that the stars reflect in the stillness of the river below. You have nowhere to be. The sauropods are resting. Their breathing is slow and vast, a a tide of air moving through lungs the size of rooms, in and out in the long, slow rhythm of creatures that have learned, over millions of years, to rest deeply and completely without fear. They breathe in, they breathe out. The ground carries the faintest vibration of it, a rhythm you can feel if you are still enough. Be still enough. The pterosaurs are roosting in the high branches, their eyes closed, their wings folded neatly against bodies that will be airborne again at dawn. They are dreaming. If animals like them dream, and some researchers believe many animals do, the REM sleep that characterizes human dreaming being visible in the brain activity of birds and reptiles and fish. The Jurassic dreams, the past dreams. You are resting inside a dream that has been dreaming itself for 150 million years. Let your breathing slow to the rhythm of the forest. In, out. The insects still sing their ancient chorus, the same frequencies they've been singing since long before the sauropods arrived, the same frequencies they will sing long after. This sound is the ground note of the world. It does not require your attention. It only requires that you be present, and you are present, and that is enough. The mist thickens slightly. The stars above it are still visible, a pale shimmer through the white. You are warm. You are safe. You are resting in one of the oldest places in the history of life on Earth, accompanied by creatures so extraordinary and so real that their bones still exist, compressed into stone, waiting in the ground for patient human hands to find them. They have been waiting 150 million years. They will wait as long as it takes. There is no urgency in deep time. There is only the slow turning of the world, and the breath of everything alive on it, and the patient dark between one moment and the next. Sleep now. The Jurassic will be here when you return. If you like this video, let me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is. I'm always curious about that. And if you have a suggested prehistoric topic, feel free to leave it in the comments. What aspect of the dinosaur world would you most like to dream about next?